everybody. So glad you could join us. So, I am here with Abigail Silver, and we're going to be talking about her books. Do you want to say a couple things about yourself first?
Sure. I'm a writer in South Carolina, just south of Charlotte. Um, and this is my first trilogy that I've ever published. I've never published before, but I have drafted close to 10 books at this point. Not new to writing, but new to the publishing scene since I believe my first book came out in 2021.
Awesome. And I just want to let everyone know, anyone that's there, before we get into the questions, that I have Abigail's Amazon author page in the description, so you guys can just easily click it and find her books if you guys are interested in what we talk about today. Okay, you ready for the
Thank you.
questions? Oh, you're welcome.
Absolutely. Fire away.
Okay, question number one: what's your WIP about? If it's a sequel, you can talk about the overall story, including previous books.
So, I like to have at least two projects going on at all times. I'm not one of those kinds of writers who can focus on one thing at a time. My brain's always going. So,
Same.
I always have at least one story that I'm drafting. That to me is like the creative process, where I'm really meeting the character and living in the character's head on the page. Um, so I have my drafting project, and then I also have my publishing project. I always have something that I'm editing, rereading, going through. Um, so my publishing project, of course, is the Redeeming Grace trilogy. This was book one. Uh, okay, so this is Child of Awareness. This was the first book that I published in 2021. And then that was followed last year by Visions of Fire. Okay, so these are all in the same series. And then I have exciting author copies, those lovely proofs that they give you, right? With the don't resell us, put right across the cover. This is my early version of Daughter of Sorrow, which is coming out on the 31st. Um,
Nice.
so those are my biggest projects.
Awesome. Uh, what is the series about?
My current drafting project is actually still in that series. I pretty much write in the same world. I call it the Usuriel multiverse. And it's basically a concept of a really, let me get my words together. It's a fusion of like urban fantasy with a lot of sci-fi elements as well. Um, the trilogy itself is set on a colony world called Sybil, where we have long-lived psychics, we have vampires, and futuristic tech all kind of like coming together into this one society. Um, my drafting project is actually a prequel, which is like a 1990s, early 2000s Earth, set around Gracie, the main character of the trilogy, her grandparents, who happen to be a psychic and a vampire. Those worlds are already kind of starting to collide there on Earth before they travel to Sybil.
Nice. Question two: what is your MC like?
So Gracie is the main character of the trilogy. She's a pyrokinetic, which means that she creates psychic fire. Um, and the flames kind of creep into her personality. So she has this bad habit of lashing out first and asking questions later. Um, when she's not lit up, though, she's very self-aware, intelligent. She loves to give snarky answers. And a lot of my readers like her sass. Isn't afraid to call people out if she doesn't agree with them, or she has a self-confidence that I think a lot of people wish that they had. I know I wish I had it. um, but unfortunately with that self-confidence, like I said, she has this tendency to like jump before she's fully understands what's going on. That's kind of her fatal flaw.
Mm. Question 3. What are your other important characters like?
So, aside from Gracie, I'd say the most important characters, besides love interests, which we'll get into in a minute, but the most important character in the trilogy, besides Gracie, is definitely her father, Gabriel. In book one, she, so Gracie loses her mother. Her mother actually loses custody of her to the state of Sybil. And it takes a whole year before her father, who she has never met, shows up to claim her. And he actually takes her to a ranch called Angelus Quietum that he owns and raises her there. And so they become very close because he's her only parent, essentially, from that time on. Um, as she grows, obviously their relationship changes and grows, as all parent-child relationships do. Um, and that changing, evolving relationship really shapes the whole series. A few other important characters are Gloria and Danae. Those are Gabriel's parents and Gracie's grandparents, and they're the subject of my current drafting project. And then Vanessa, who is Gracie's cousin, and she's the head of the Overwatch, which is their psychic police force. Jillian, who is Gracie's trainer at the Overwatch, and then, of course, her love interests, James and Liam.
Nice. Uh, Ellie says the Redeeming Grace trilogy is such a great series. Love Grace's character.
Thanks, Ellie. Good to see you.
Uh, question 4 is if your MC has a love interest, what is their dynamic like?
So, obviously, it's a trilogy. It's a long story, and I don't want to be too much of a spoiler for those folks who haven't read the whole thing. But um, Gracie actually has two major love interests, and they form a very different triangle than most like traditional, oh, she has to pick who's she gonna go with, love triangles. So James is her main love interest in book one. He's a diplomat. He's a gentle human being. I tried to make him as much of a Boy Scout as I could while still being believable as a teenage boy. So he has this soothing effect on Gracie. He kind of smooths out those social rough edges that she has because she's been very isolated growing up. She has this really fiery temper, so she can be a little bit tough to be around, and he's very good at kind of like greasing the wheels there. Liam, who's her other love interest, doesn't show up until the very end of book one. We don't really know him at all. He just sort of like, oh, here's this guy. Um, and then in book two, he really develops into her other love interest. Of course, the complication is that he's more interested in James than he is in Gracie for most of the book, which kind of makes things a little complicated. But that the dynamic in their relationship, the trio of those three and their friendship over time is really one of my favorite aspects of the trilogy.
Nice. Question 5. Who, despite the love interest, is closest to your MC? What is their dynamic like?
So, as I mentioned before, Gracie is very close with her father, Gabriel. But unfortunately, Gabriel's got this really deep, dark, troubled past, okay? The thing about Gabe is that he's 400 years old when we first meet him. He comes from a very long-lived lineage, as does Gracie, obviously. And so, because of this, it's kind of like if your dad was George Washington and he was still alive. So, it's this complicated, like, uh, there's politics going on. He's a public figure. He's someone that people know and have rumors about that were very old and rumors about that are very new. And it's very hard for her to know what to believe, what's real. Her father doesn't like to talk about it because, how do you unpack that much history? How do you broach that with your kid? I think that we, as a parent, I think we could all be, sympathetic to his plight, but he does not. He doesn't really step up to the plate very well. He really doesn't. He just sort of avoids it. So between that and his unhealthy relationship with alcohol and substance abuse over time, really it impacts their relationship. And I try really hard to deal with the substance abuse issue with compassion, um, as well as not sugarcoating it. It's something that I've done a lot of research on, and that I try really hard to stay as true to life as I can with that topic.
Hmm. Well, that sounds good. Question 6. What's your world like? Is it similar to our world? Is it different? How so?
So Sybil's a colony world in a universe that's mostly similar to ours, in that technology works. They have more advanced technology than we do. So they use hollow projectors rather than TVs. Implanted data chips there are in their neck, so they'll tap their neck to like check the time, um, and also to activate their connection to the internet. Um, James's culture, he's actually from what's called the Terran culture, and so they use avatars, which are basically um, androids that interact with the world, while their body is actually in like almost suspended animation. So this is another aspect of culture. How do they relate to technology? Where Gracie lives, there's actually limits on how advanced technology can be and where it can be used, who can use it. So I try to play with how people relate to technology as a cultural difference. Obviously, there's also supernatural elements such as vampires, the psychic Usuriel family, which Gracie is a member of, and the politics between those various factions. So we've got the vampires, we've got the family, Terrans, and mortals. And so all of these different factions have their own agendas, their own needs, their own wants, their own relationships with each other, and how those all come together is integral to Gracie's story.
Interesting. Question 7. If you write fantasy, what's your magic system?
So my magic system is two-tiered. Vampires operate on death energy, while family psychics operate on life energy. So any mortal can become a vampire, but the only way to become an Usuriel is if you are born into the family. So one obviously is more exclusive than the other. Danae and Gloria are the first generation of awareness for the family, which is what they call anyone who has powers has awareness. So hence the title of the first book, Child of Awareness. So Gloria is the strongest psychic on the planet, and her children, Gabriel and Adora, come in close seconds. So that triad is probably the strongest psychics on the planet. And as the generations mingle with more and more mortals, the children have fewer and less powerful gifts. The first 5 generations are called elder children, while the lower generations are called younger children. Elder children are much more likely to be what are called 3Ts. So that's someone who has teleportation, telekinesis, and telepathy. The second generation, Gabriel and Adora, also had pyrokinesis like Gracie. So 3T plus pyro. So as a third generation Firebird, Gracie's fire is extremely powerful in comparison to her peers. She's also relatively rare in that most of the third generation was born many, many years ago. So she doesn't have many peers in her age range. Most of her age range peers are much farther down the generation line and therefore not as strong psychically. She's also head mute, which means that her mind is completely silent to telepaths. She can't be read or communicated with by a telepath, which makes her even worse at telepathy than a mortal.
Hmm.
Her
Interesting.
relationship, huh?
I said interesting.
Well, every time you give a power, in my opinion, you gotta give some. There's got to be a price or some handicap, something that that kind of offsets that power. So that's one of Gracie's blind spots.
Oh,
Um, and I think that it becomes almost a disability, if you will. I mean, compared to her peers, Gracie is isolated by the fact that she can't be communicated with. The relationship between vampires and the family is really complex. Danae is the original vampire, but his blood relationship with Gloria means he's a daywalker with a heartbeat. He appears mortal. So, and he's fathered two children. So he functions as a mortal most of the time. If someone didn't tell you what he was, you wouldn't know. Most other vampires are not nearly as lucky. They don't have that kind of a relationship with the Nusuriel to keep them alive, basically.
yeah.
So, you know, a vampire without a serial host or a partner is forced to have mortal hosts, and that's carefully regulated by their government, and those regulations are enforced by the Overwatch. So we have this kind of, um, and of course, the Overwatch is manned by family members. So here you have this family that is both playing host to vampires, but also and integrally in like their original first couple is a mixed couple, but they also police the vampires and make sure that they are not abusing their mortal partners. So that's, I feel like there's a lot of conflict of interest going on there. And of course, any conflict is ripe for story.
Ellie said, interesting take on vampires, and I agree.
Yeah, I for vampires, I really I hate the idea of making them the most powerful monster.
Mm.
For whatever reason that irks me. It almost is like a surrender to death, because that's to me vampires are a fear of mortality. Um, when we make them more human, when there are side, you know, loopholes, um, when there are more powerful creatures that exist and thrive on life, I feel that it puts that mortality into balance.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I
yeah,
agree. I like.
I've always enjoyed playing with tropes, which I think was what we're about to talk about.
Yeah. And a couple questions. Yeah. I like playing with tropes too. I like whatever. I like to add sometimes a twist to a trope, so it's not exactly what you expect. That's
Hmm.
always
Definitely.
fun. Question 8: do you like to write major plot twists?
Oh yeah. I mean, what's a good plot without a twist? But I try really hard to make all twists logical. They've got to make sense. If I don't foreshadow it well enough, it's not going to feel natural to the reader. So it should never feel like it's coming out of left field. It should be uh, a situation where the reader's like, "Oh, I didn't see that coming, but man, now that makes total sense why we were talking about this 5 minutes over here, five chapters back here, and we were talking about this." Um, so when it comes around that corner, it's like you almost like something slowly coming into focus, like that the camera is fuzzy at first, and the shapes are taking, just sort of like colors at first, and then it just sort of sharpens, like, oh, I was not expecting that to be that, but that definitely, it makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. And when readers go back and then they can catch the foreshadowy little details that lead to the twist.
Yes, exactly. And that's what you want the reader to enjoy your work not once but multiple times. I really feel that the key to rereadability is that attention to detail, getting it in there, and even though you know that the reader is probably not going to pick up on that one the first time that they read it, possibly not even the second time that they read it, but the ones who really dig into it and are like, man, why is this line even here? Oh, wait. And you give those Easter eggs to the diehard fans. I love that stuff.
Yeah, me too. Question 9. What tropes are in your WIP?
So tropes and I have a strange relationship. There's like this tiny handful of tropes that I like enjoy the way that they are. Like very limited. I think the biggest example is like hurt comfort. I feel like that's a great way to create a vulnerability in a character so that you know you have the that emotional bond between two characters. But a lot of other tropes are just lacking in some way. And I find myself like reading them going, but what if we did this? You know, like why is it always a damsel in distress? Why can't the pretty boy be the one who needs saving all the time?
Right?
Like like and of course, you know, it's my world, so you know, the what ifs pretty much turn into plot points, you know. So the reverse damsel is a frequent flyer in my stories. Okay, and the pretty boys, you'll find a damsel in manzel in distress pretty frequently. Um, but it's not just those simple tropes that I like to take apart and reassemble in interesting ways. One of my favorites is like I was talking about the vampire as monster trope. So vampires are still undead. Yes, they still feed on people, but in Gracie's world, they aren't the most powerful supernatural creatures, especially compared to the more powerful psychic family members. And they are just as likely to be a victim in a situation as they are to be a villain. So, playing with and inverting expectations and power dynamics is one of my favorite ways to bring a fresh take to a familiar idea.
Yeah. Well, I like that. I like. I don't. I agree because I don't think vampires should always be the most powerful supernatural. Because there are plenty of monsters that haven't really been explored that could be, and maybe they're more powerful they've than we've seen because we don't see them very often.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
so I like that they're not the most powerful in your world. Manzel in distress, love it. Me
Right?
too. Me too.
Yeah, yeah. I all I can say is, uh, you know, I get so tired of that whole idea of Disney love tropes, the whole Sleeping Beauty, and because I grew up in that age, you know, where like the only romance was really, you know, laying around waiting to be kissed, or you know, some kind of oh gosh, I guess The Lion King, Nala convinces Simba to come back and save the pride, right? So I mean, you can have this persuasion, you know, but he has to be the hero in the end, right? And I was never about that. I wanted to be the one with the sword. So
Same.
uh, you know, in my world, usually the woman's the one with the sword.
Same here too. But the women's are usually the ones with the sword too. They're usually the ones that have to save the day. Maybe that's why I love Mulan so much because she was the one that had to save the day in the end. One of my favorite Disney
Yes.
movies.
Yes, exactly.
So yes, my women always be. That's why my main characters are always women, and they're always the ones to save the day. They have the weapons, they have the magic, whatever. And I definitely love that because we need more of that.
Yes, we do. And I also think that there's something it's okay it's okay for characters to need each other.
Yeah.
That's something that I used to really get mad about with the like the Batman and the Superman because I was raised on comics. I loved that stuff. And you know, I wanted them to need somebody because we all do. We need a community. And I feel like that's another thing that I really try hard to show in my work is that these aren't individuals who just like charge around and can save the day with no consequences. Like they're in a community and their actions have consequences, even if they have the best of intentions. Sometimes being the hero can not turn out the greatest.
Yeah, it can definitely
So
take a toll on you because you have like everyone's looking up to you. You have to be this. You have to save the world and everything. And then so yeah, it has a toll on you that I don't think a lot of books, movies, TV shows, whatever show. I know my
absolutely.
in my current series, I'm playing with the fact that you need someone because my main character doesn't want to admit that she needs anybody, but it's a lesson she's gonna have to learn the hard way in my current book, book three. So I definitely agree because we need more of that. Like, yes, you can be empowered and independent, but you can still need someone to lean on when you're having a hard time, when you're in your toughest.
Yeah, absolutely. Completely agree. Love it.
Question 10. What themes are in your WIP?
All right, so as the Redeeming Grace series follows Gracie while she's growing up, obviously we have a lot of, coming of age themes, such as challenging parent-child relationships, the increasing complexity of peer and romantic relationships as they get older, determining that the world is made up of shades of gray rather than simple blacks and whites of childish understanding. So, things get more complex. Who's really the bad guy? Hard to say, right? I don't think people really realize who the actual villain is in my trilogy until book three. I don't think it's really completely clear until the very end, which is something that I kind of like about it. Um, I feel like we know that there are bad people and that there are political situations that are not good for our main characters, but understanding who is really behind it is, I think, is really, I wanted it to be kind of up in the air because I think that that's how life is. If you aren't willing to really analyze what's going on around you and think when you're consuming media, it's easy to, miss who the real bad guys are. I think the biggest theme for me, though, is the difficult balance between sheltering a child and educating them. I feel like our culture swings from one extreme to the other, and that effective balance in between, it gets really lost. One of the biggest concepts I tried to address with Gabriel and Gracie's relationship is how damaging it is when a parent isn't honest, and doesn't have the hard conversations that they need to have with with their children.
Yeah, nice. I like that because I always felt like that was a pet peeve when we would see on TV and stuff where parents weren't honest and it's like they're saying they're doing the best, they're doing it for their kids. I'm like, no, the kids need to know the truth. You know, my mom has always been completely honest. She never even told me about Santa or Easter Bunny because she didn't like to lie. And
See, that's me with my kid.
really,
Yeah,
that's gonna be me when I'm a mom. Like, I'm not gonna tell him about all of that. Plus, if you look deeper, those stories are kind of not okay because you always teach your kids, you know, not to. Strangers can't break into your house. Don't accept candy from strangers, gifts from strangers. But then, once a year
yeah,
for Christmas and Easter, it's okay. No.
right. Absolutely, I agree. So yeah, no, I will never forget. So side anecdote, right? My son, I was always honest with him. Um, and when he was about three, he was in preschool, and it's St. Patty's Day, and I was like, he was telling me that all of his teachers were telling him that leprechauns were real, and I was like, honey, no, they're messing with you, like this, it's not real. And so then the teachers decided to put green food dye and little prints on the ground, like into the bathroom. So there's green food dye in the toilet and like little footprints, and completely took him in. Like I could not tell him that it was fake. Like those leprechauns were real that year.
Wow.
So, so sometimes society doesn't let you, like really, but it's true. Like society has this really, it's built in that you have to lie to your kids about certain things, and like navigating that can be hard. Like when I first wrote this, Like when I first started writing this story, um, I hadn't had my son yet. I took 2 years off to have him. And then when I came back, and as I've gotten older and, and he's gotten older, my son has gotten older, and, my perspective, find myself sympathizing with Gabriel more and more. I'm like, oh gosh, that would be a hard conversation to have. But I think that's just the point that, these are hard conversations to have, and no one knows when the right time is to have them. And we have to, as parents, as adults, we have to be honest with our kids, and we have to have the courage to have those conversations. I can't tell you how many young people I've talked to, and even my friends who have said, like, my parents never even had the talk with me. Like, I knew nothing about sex ed because my parents just didn't bother to teach me. I learned from the internet, and I'm like, God, that's such an important thing to know. Um, and so I feel like that was kind of one of the big root things that I wanted to really explore in this book is like, what are the consequences? Why is it important to have those conversations even though they're painful? So
Yeah, I mean, just because yeah, I think the harder conversations are the most important ones to have.
exactly.
Question 11. What was your inspiration for your WIP?
Um, so I can't tell you the actual inspiration because it's a spoiler for the entire trilogy. Okay, so I this was one of the only projects where the end came to me in complete, vivid detail. I was like, okay, this is the scene I'm aiming for. And I do visualize in scenes. I often visualize while I'm driving, playing music, doing chores around the house, in the shower. Um, but I really had a very strong vision of this final scene of how it was going to go, and it did change by the time I wrote it down because it always does change. The view from inside your character's head is always just a little bit different than yours. But um, I almost wrote this book in reverse. I sat down and I said, okay, for this part to make sense, I have to put this in place. And for this to happen, I need this. I need this relationship. I need this person. And I really, I reverse engineered this story. And I really think that's why it works better than a lot of my others. This is absolutely my best work out of a lifetime of writing. And I really believe that it's because I was able to have that vision of the end and truly design it as a perfect storm to culminate in that final moment.
Nice. Yeah, that sounds interesting. I don't know if I could really do it that way, but that sounds like an interesting way to
It's
plot a
the only time
story.
I ever have, but it worked. So
Yeah, I have a series. It's I started book one, but I kind of put it off to the side so I can finish my current series. But in that, I kind of have the ending, part of the ending figured out towards the end. It's like one of those movies where you would watch where it's like you'll see the ending first, and then you have to figure out how they got to the ending.
yes,
And
exactly.
so that's the only time I've ever done it like that, and I'm still working on it. But so that's gonna be an interesting series to write.
Yes. Well, good luck. I found it very satisfying when I finally got to that scene. I was like, yes,
I bet.
there it is. But I had to get creative to get there. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, I bet. Question 12. Are you a plotter, pantser, or somewhere in between? If your WIP is part of a series, how much do you have mapped out for it?
So, okay. Um, Full disclosure, I've been writing in the serial multiverse since I was a teenager, in high school. Uh, and I've written probably close to a dozen books in the series, that get revised and reimagined and rewritten and edited and added onto pretty much continuously. It's just what I do. um, this this trilogy is lodged pretty much firmly in the middle of the story arc that I have written out. So that is kind of nice because I know what happened before. And now that I've written, after I wrote Gracie's story, I went on to write two full-length novels and a novella past where she ends. So knowing where she was going and where she came from has been really useful in this project. But that said, I'm firmly in the middle, somewhere between a pantser and a plotter. Um, I do a lot of planning, but all of it is flexible. None of it is set in stone. I lay out important relationships and something like a timeline in a planning document, but the instant I sit down to write, it that timeline is pretty much useless because once I see everything from the character's point of view and I'm on the page and everything looks different. Everything always looks a little bit different. And so I'm all their senses come into play. What are they seeing? What are they tasting? What are they hearing? If they're psychic, what are they sensing? What emotions are around them? Is there someone talking in their head? Like there's just so much going on that I might not see. Um, so when I really step into that writing moment, things completely change. Um, so a plotter is someone in a car following a road, following road signs. I'm like a hiker in the woods with a hand-drawn map and a compass. I know the general direction I want to go and some of the landmarks along the way, but I've never climbed this mountain before, and it might look completely different from the top than I expected it to.
I feel that seriously.
um, for my series, so you know, like I said before, Gracie's story I think is the best piece that I've ever written. I have really high standards for what I want to put out into the world as far as publishing. Um, do I think that I may eventually come up with another Usuriel multiverse piece that I think is good enough to put out there? Sure. Hasn't happened yet, but it might at some point. I always want my next project to be the best project, if I can make it that. Um, but I really am okay with Gracie's story standing alone because I think it's solid by itself. It makes sense, and it leaves the reader in a place that I sat for a long time in my creative process. I was like, all right, well, this is the end of Gracie's story, and I'm okay with that. I don't need to know necessarily what happens next. And if I do need to know, that knowing can happen in the reader's mind. It doesn't have to come from me.
True. I like that. Nice. Question 13. Who's your favorite character to write in your WIP? If it's your MC, then who is the second?
So parents aren't supposed to pick their favorite children. Uh, I enjoy writing all of my characters. They're all very unique in the way that they see the world and their talents and what they bring to the table. A few of them do stand out as fun, though. Okay, so when it comes to dialogue, Adora, that's Gabriel's sister and Gracie's aunt, she doesn't get a ton of it, especially in Gracie's trilogy because of most of the trilogy occurs after her death. But every time I write Adora's dialogue, it's just so much fun. Like she's sarcastic and brutally honest in a way only sociopaths can be. She uses her use of like analogy is just twisted, but in a way that I always giggle. So, um, Adora, when it comes to writing dialogue, she's a lot of fun. Um, but I'd say the character that I've written the most about, in fact, the one that I probably one of the only ones I've written from conception almost to death is Gabriel. I keep coming back to Gabe for whatever reason. He's witty, arrogant, sharp as a tack, but at the same time, he has these really deep flaws and like this self-loathing that goes with them, and I think that's incredibly relatable. We have all hated something about ourselves, and Gabriel sort of embodies that emotion to me. The deep desire to like hide what makes us vulnerable, and yet that simultaneous need to give into it because it's what makes us human and is able to connect with other humans. So I think another thing that draws me to writing him is that I've fleshed out the generations on either side of him. I know his parents, his lovers, his children so intimately because I've written all of them. And so he's surrounded by this great cast of characters who each have a really distinct relationship with him. And as a result, his character just has this richness and depth that he just makes sense, um, and has a voice that is really rare for a character to just come alive, as much as he has for me over the last decade or so that I've been writing his.
Nice. Question 14. What's the dynamic like between your MC and villain? If it's not fantasy, then the main character toward your MC.
So I'm not sure that the word villain is the right one for the Redeeming Grace trilogy. It's not completely obvious who is the villain until the very end. Um, I am of the firm belief, though, that like no one views themselves as evil, or at least it's very rare. I mean, I guess I have run into a few people who thought they were bad people, but that's a rare situation. And usually those people have very low self-esteem. So usually people have a reason why they act the way they do. And even if others don't agree with them, we can see where they're coming from, like what their motivation is and why they're acting the way that they are. So that's something that I try really hard, even with like sociopathic characters like Adora, um, or even characters in another part of my series who are, I mean, they're just really horrible creatures, sentient beings. I guess they're not human, but they're really not nice creatures. But they make sense. They have a logic to their insanity. For Adora, what's hers is hers. She will protect it to the death. Um, her family is hers. No one's allowed to touch it. Unfortunately, that means that she's sort of obsessed with it in an unhealthy way. She makes it very clear that, her brother is hers, and that is almost quasi-romantic in her mind. And so there's like unhealthy things going on there, but we understand that that's the way she thinks, and it makes sense because it's consistent to her.
Interesting. Question 15. Without being too spoilery, what was your favorite scene to write in your WIP so far?
So the whole trilogy, that's a lot of book. Uh, so there was one scene in book 3 where a character went completely off script. Dead refused to say what I wanted him to. Um, I was kind of shocked. Never had a character do that to me before. I was like, all right. So the scene's gonna go this way. And that is not what I told you to say. That is definitely not what I told you to say.
I've had that
Um,
happen to me before.
yes, yes. I won't exactly get into what happened in the scene, but it is a romantic scene. So readers may be able to figure it out once they've read the book. Uh, it is it's fun to read. Again, I love it when characters come alive, and really have their own personalities and senses of humor.
Me too. Question 16. If you're writing a series, do you like ending on cliffhangers? Do you plan to end on a cliffhanger in your current WIP?
So I don't believe in total cliffhangers. To have a satisfying ending, you really have to have some kind of resolution somewhere. Um, with book 1, we ended with all the characters safe. James is going off to school. Gracie's nervous about the future, but she's not afraid. Book two, Visions of Fire. It ends with Gracie and Gabriel coming to an understanding and resolving those conflicts. So we have like um maybe not a full resolution of their relationship, but they end in a really good place. Um and so even though there are still a lot of loose threads, like her romantic status with James and Liam is kind of left open, and you know, stuff is still going on in the background. There's a lot of politics still going on. We still have that big resolution for one of the big themes in the book, and none of the characters are like in peril at the time. The end of book three, okay. So several readers have described it as brutal. Um, it's not neat and clean or tied up with a bow, but it does answer all the questions that we wanted answered from the beginning, and it does it with a bang.
Interesting. Sounds exciting.
So the most frequent word used for the end of book three is addictive. I've had multiple uh readers when I first finished so I finished the trilogy as one large piece. I ended up breaking it into three pieces and adding onto it to create three standalone novels. Um, but when I first put it out, I would give the whole huge document to a reader and they would read it. And I had several people come back to, like, they would comment, they would talk to me as they were reading and, oh, giving feedback, blah, blah, blah. And then they would disappear. They'd be gone for like 2 days. And I'd be like, where is everybody? What's going on? And then they would come back and be like, oh my God, I couldn't stop reading it. I stayed up all last night. I haven't had no sleep. Like, why did you do this to me? And so yeah, the end's a little bit intense. But to be fair, like I said, I reverse engineered that ending and I was putting into place pieces of it from the beginning of book one. So every little scene, every little piece was deliberately designed to come together into that one final explosion. And so, when you get to the unraveling, it's a lot of, oh my God, that's what, oh, and that over there, that comes in too. All right. Okay. So
Nice.
hopefully it all falls together like a giant jigsaw puzzle and no one comes and knocks on my door real mad about it. Yes.
Yeah, interesting. Ellie says, yes, seriously addicting. Question 17. What's the scene you want to write in your WP that you're excited for that you haven't gotten to yet? You've written all of it,
So
you
the
said,
trilogy,
right?
yeah, so the trilogy's complete. Is not really applicable to that anymore, but on my drafting work, obviously I always have a drafting project going on. Like I said, it's about Gracie's grandparents, Danae and Gloria, who we do get to see in the trilogy. Um, I'm planning a scene where they travel outside of the worlds that we're familiar with, and the effects are going to be very unexpected, but very important to the plot. So I'm really excited and interested to see how that scene's going to play out. I haven't completely figured it out yet, but I'm excited for it.
Nice. Question 18. What's your favorite thing to write about? A certain type of scene, like fight scenes or romantic scenes and so on.
So I mean I love a good mix. A good mix of subject matter is always good. You gotta have a little romance, a little action, a little drama, a little political theater. As long as there's tension, I'm like a tension junkie. Like I've got to have the threads of tension going. Like I've always, when I'm writing, I feel like I'm always weaving these threads of tension into the story. Like, oh, how can I have a little more romantic tension? Okay, pull that in here. Oh, how can I have a little bit more political tension? Oh, pull that in here. So I'm always trying to like pull those threads together. As long as I'm working on the plot and the plot's moving forward, I'm happy writing. I will say though that my signature is probably trauma. Physical, mental. If there's no blood or bile on the floor, no one's crying or begging for their life from some higher power, the story has not gotten good yet. I have writing friends who talk about feeling too bad for their characters to injure them. I'm over here having the time of my life while trying to decide how I can psychologically break my characters a little bit harder.
That's me, yeah.
That said, though, I also know some writers who just like keep breaking their characters more and more until it just like seems unrealistic or irredeemable. And I'm not really about that either. I always want there to be like a path back to healing. Like, I think what separates me from a lot of other writers is that I am as interested in the path, the healing of those traumas
Me
as I
too.
am in inflicting those traumas. And so I'm really interested in like the whole arc from start to finish. How did we get here? How do we heal from it? What is the journey that takes us through the dark night? Who are the people and the supports that we need to get us there? I feel like the book after Gracie's, we get introduced to a young man named Mary, and I didn't realize it when I was writing it, but the theme of his story is so he was isolated on a generation or on a ship, a derelict research ship with his two siblings for almost a decade. Like he's in his early 20s, and all of the mortals died on his ship when he was like 12, 15, somewhere in there. So um it's him learn he gets rescued from that ship and onto the Inspiration, which is, the generation ship that took the Usuriels to Sybil. So he comes onto the Inspiration, which is a generation ship that has been designed for all these people. It has over 150 people on board. It has this thriving, healthy community, and it's him learning to trust and learning to accept that he doesn't have to do all this by himself, that he doesn't have to be the hero, that he can, be a part of this community. And so I feel like that is that when I boil down what themes I really love examining, it's how do I break them a little bit harder and how can I heal them a little bit better?
Yeah, I agree because I feel like we don't see that enough um about the healing process, because like I want them to not be completely traumatic when the story ends, even though during the story they went through a lot of traumatic stuff.
Yeah.
And sometimes before the story, depending on how bad their backstory is. My current MC, she's the most traumatic character I've ever written, but there's this big plot in book 3 where she is slowly starting to heal from her past torment, and she's actually starting, and by the end she'll actually be in, for the first time in 1,000 years, she's a vampire, so 1,000 years she is in a reasonably good place that she hasn't been in. And I feel like that's just so important, especially after everything she's been through. And I feel like that's just something we don't see that. Like, we see all the trauma, but we never see the healing portion.
Yes. And I think that is important because, you know, as we talk about the fact that mental health is so important and, you know, um, and having these paths back for folks that, okay, I know depression exists. Now what? Okay, I know some people have suicidal, tendencies or ideations. Now what? What do we do about it? How do you come back from that? And I think that that's a really important topic that we really need to talk about in fiction, in literature, and in real life.
Yeah, I agree. Question 19. What do you love most about your WIP and the series overall?
All right, so it's hard to talk about the thing you love, in your own right. It's like bragging on your own children. It makes you sound like a bit of a jerk. uh, but a few things that I really enjoy when I read my books. So, I call me vain. I do. I love revisiting my children.
Me
Part of
too.
why I love uh writing is because I've solidified my fantasies into a form that I can revisit them whenever I want to and tweak them to be more perfect and just the way I want them to be. Um, so when I'm going back and rereading, first, I love that they're very visceral. They're immersive. I feel like I'm really there and fully transported into that world, and I hope that my reader will be as well. I try to pay very close attention to the characters' senses, to their physical experience of the world. And second, I truly love these characters. If I haven't made you fall in love with someone by the end, then I haven't achieved my goal.
Yeah, yeah, I like that. So, last question, question 20. What are you most excited for readers to read once it's published?
I mean, all of it, obviously. It wouldn't be there if I didn't, if it wasn't good, I would have cut it out by now. My some of my planning documents, I used them, for my cutscenes, and there are some cutscene documents that are longer than the books that are associated with them. Look, I'm willing to kill my darlings, okay? If it's not good, it's gone. Um, every bit of this novel has been gone over and over with care. I've discussed the psychology of every character with friends and beta readers. I've added tiny details, bits of foreshadowing that I don't think readers will appreciate until they've read the whole piece. Um, like I said, it's this trilogy is not the kind of thing that you read once, get that like rosy good book glow, and then like toss it aside. Um, I've written those kinds of books before, and I enjoyed reading them. So I'm not knocking them. Feel good books are awesome. I mean, they've got their place, but that's just not what Gracie's story is. Her story is the sort that's going to linger, that kind of bothers you when you're doing other things, that kind of like just intrudes on your daydreams and follows you around the house asking, how did we end up here? Um, through my experience writing Gracie and sharing her story with others, I've come to believe that this trilogy is made to be read at least twice. Um, the first read is kind of like a mad dash to the end to figure out what is going on. You want to unlock the secrets. You want to know what's going on around the corner. You want to know what's going on for real, because Gracie questions herself and questions reality so many times that you want to know by the end what's going on. It's full of shocks and twists and heartbreaking moments, and you realize as things are coming together, it's like, oh, that's the shape of things. And some readers won't like it by the end, and it's not for everyone. No
True.
piece of writing is. Um, but on the second read through, I think that's when people fully appreciate it. Um, the second read through is reading it as I wrote it, which is knowing the ending and getting to see those little glimpses of the future of the impending doom, if you will. Um, and that when smaller things happen, you can see, you know, like smaller side things like Vanessa's past and the way Martin's story arc complements Gracie. My readers will know who he is. um, but those littler things, uh, I call Martin the smaller tragedy that is happening inside a larger tragedy. When you put them all together and you get this sense of depth, um, it makes it feel like a real world. It makes it feel like a story that has meaning, it has depth, and ends where it does for a reason. I'm Ellie. Yes, kills me too. All right. Anyway. Mm,
But yeah, that I really like that. That's really sweet. So that's the final question. I'm so glad you were able to join me today.
absolutely. Thank you so much again for letting me come on here. It's been a lot of fun.
Of course. And again, for anyone new to the audience, I have Abigail's Amazon author page in the description below, so you guys can easily click it. And if this sounds like a series that's you wanted to read, that certainly sounds interesting, then go check it out. Um, and make sure you like and make sure you subscribe to my channel if you want to keep updated on my author interviews. I've been doing them every Saturday, so there will be another author interview in a week. So keep your eyes out for that. And yeah, that will be all.
Thank you. Have a great night.